Check 1, 2, test.
Testing. Welcome, folks. Welcome to the Berks County Patriots new meeting location at Temple Fire Company Ballroom. Thank you so much. Great to have a full crowd. Appreciate your patience while we were going through this. I know we're getting started a little late. We're on a learning curve trying to organize our parking outside as well as what we have in here. So thank you for being patient, but we are getting started. So welcome again. Welcome to all you new folks. How many new folks do we have here tonight? Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Special welcome to all you new folks. And for those that don't know me, I'm Sam Brancador, Chairman of the Berks County Patriots. Kelly is going to open our meeting with a prayer and a pledge.
If you'll bow your heads with me. Father God, we are gathered here because we love you and we love our country, the United States of America. Not the corporation, but the republic that you inspired and blessed. We are grateful that we can come together in freedom and share in our like-mindedness. And Lord, we welcome you here tonight. Father, our freedoms are at risk. Our country, your country, is being torn apart from within. It is the work of the enemy. So we are gathered here because we care, because we want to fight for our freedoms, and we the people need you. Like in 2 Kings 6:16, let us have eyes like Elisha to see that we are strong, we are many, and we are winning. We are in a spiritual battle between good and evil, and your word tells us that evil will not prevail. Psalms 21:11 says, though they intend to harm you, the schemes they devise will not. Thank you, Lord. So tonight I lift up each person here and others they can reach, and I ask you, please touch all our hearts and open all our minds tonight, tomorrow, and every day going forth, so that we may decipher between truth and lies, that we are not persuaded by the enemy through words that sound promising, but are designed to destroy. Make the truth clear to us, because the truth will set us free and keep us free. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for being God Almighty, creator of the universe, and our Heavenly Daddy, a God who loves unconditionally and who gives us hope. We give you thanks, praise, glory, and honor in Jesus' precious, holy, powerful name. Amen. Amen. If you'll join me in pledge, remove your hats if you haven't already. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
God bless America.
Okay, folks, we have a special treat for you tonight. We have Bunny Stock, who is going to sing the national anthem. Welcome, Bunny.
Wow, what a crowd. Yeah. Okay. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight
again, folks, to our new meeting location at Temple Fire Company Ballroom. As many of you know, we've been looking for another location from the field house. Great organization there, loved their time there, but it did not have air conditioning. Also recently, they have decided they're not going to be leasing in 2024. As far as the air conditioning, we might have to boop it up a little bit, but we have a full crowd, and so that's probably causing it somewhat. Also, we're very fortunate that we're able to get the ballroom. There is very few venues out there that will fit our needs with our capacity and what we have. It's modern here. We have, in the center of Berks County, we have plenty of parking. Now, the parking, your first time here, certainly is confusing. We have parking in the back, all down through the fence. There's a few parking spaces, actually in the grass area across the road. And then we also are able to use Citizens Bank across the street. Quite a lot of parking over there. You can do that. And obviously there's also on-street parking that you can do as well. And we ask you that you do respect where they have the cones and so forth for the fire companies to be able to get their vehicles out as they need to. We have a map on our website. If you look at that, that should give you some guidance. We might update that a little bit as well. But again, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I also want to thank the Temple Fire Company. Folks, they were fantastic with the transition that we had here. They could not have been more cooperative, and I hope some of you, join and become members. Please, thank you. We also want to thank you, our members, for your patience and help with this transition, and also for your financial support. Everything is appreciated. We thank you so much. Thank you again. We do want to let you know we did update most of our 4x8 signs, putting our new meeting location on. Those of you that have the yard signs, that have the old location on, we have purchased decals to put on. I believe, Wayne, do we still have any here tonight? Wayne? Wayne? You have decals here tonight? Yes or no? Oh, yeah, you still have. Are you sure? Okay, I just want to make sure, because someone told me they weren't sure. Okay, so folks, any of you have yard signs, just stop over there, get them, take them, and put them on so you have your new locations. Appreciate it if you do that. There are issues that several of us would like to talk about tonight, but we decided to strip that from the agenda because we want to have the maximum time for our special program tonight. Now, I do have a few announcements I want to make. How many of you know that tonight, actually this week, is Constitution Week? How many? How many? Everybody should. Constitution Week is from September 17th to September 23rd. How many of you know that during that period of time, the schools must teach the Constitution? Must teach the Constitution. Folks, I want you to know, a law was passed in 2004 that any federal institution that does not teach the Constitution can lose federal funds. Because in the wording in the Constitution, second to last page, it says shall. Shall means must. So check with your schools, check with your grandkids, your children and so forth. Make sure they are doing it. Also, this is not just schools. This is all federal facilities, such as post offices, any federal buildings. They must at least hand something out this week pertaining to the Constitution. We need to make sure we push that and enforce that, particularly in the school area. So make you aware. For those of you that have the pocket Constitution, as I said earlier, second to last page has it. So you'll see there if you want some more information. Let's see, another announcement I have here. VCP board elections will be held November 16th. Nominations will be open the month of October. If interested, submit in writing, email, U.S. mail to any board member or VCP website. Self-nominations are permissible. Also, we need committee people and IT people. We will have more on this next month. You can also go to our website. We do need help. Please, consider that. I already talked about that. Okay, let's get started. How many of you think we have a runaway federal government? Well, if you don't have your hands up, you're at the wrong meeting. No, just kidding. Of course we have a runaway federal government. How many of you know what Article 5 in the U.S. Constitution is? Well, all of you are going to know tonight. Wade suggested I actually read Article 5. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read part of it. Again, in this handout that all of you should have. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall purpose amendments to the proposed amendments to the Constitution, or, and this is the meeting tonight, or on the application of the legislators of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for the proposing amendment. That's the second part, and that's what most of you are going to hear tonight. Now, what you're going to hear, I'm going to go through the format we have here. Each of these speakers could speak for a couple hours. There's so much to this. You're just going to get an overview, and then you're going to have to do some research on your own as far as what you think might be the best cost. Okay, the format, and Ed, if you want to just remember this a little bit. Our first speaker will be Kenn Quinn. He's proponent of Convention of States. Ken has a table in the back there. Ken will have 35 minutes to give his presentation, followed by Joanna Martin, she's back there, who will also have 35 minutes. Now, this is not a debate type format. A yellow flag will go up with 5 minutes remaining. A red flag on the hook will come out when time expires. After both presentations, we will then go to a Q&A. First question will be going to Joanna Martin, and alternating questions to each speaker. Kenn Quinn will get the last question. In order to maximize questions, we will have no rebuttal. The questions will be limited to the speakers to 90 seconds to answer. I know that's going to be very difficult. They can take 5-10 minutes. Please do the best that you can. The audience, we ask you again to get the maximum questions, to limit your questions and make them questions rather than statements to 30 seconds. We will be putting red flags up, so please take that into account. We will, between the two presentations, we will do our gun raffle. Is that correct, Steve? We do have the gun raffle. We will then give us time to remove the screen here and put a table up for both of our speakers to come up for the Q&A. Let's see here. Okay. You all know our speakers as far as their bio. We have put it out on our website, Facebook, flyers. We've been doing this for a month or so, so everybody should know who they are. So I don't want to take any time going through their bios. However, to at least make it official, since it's being videotaped, I want to make sure that I'm going to make a short announcement before each presentation, one sentence for each speaker, so that'll be on our videotape then. Okay, so our first speaker is Kenn Quinn. Ken, if you make your way up, please. Ken advocates for states to exercise their constitutional authority under Article 5 to support an application for the constitutional term limit amendment. Let's all welcome Kenn Quinn. You got the proper Constitution there, right? Of course I do. Okay, good for you.
Hey, Ken, I'm going to switch you over now.
Oh yeah, let me, look at that. Excellent, that's great.
Good.
I've lost my voice talking to all of you, so I'm going to do my best. I want to thank you, Sam. I want to thank you all for the invite to come here this evening. Whoops. Wow. This already has really done wonders for my spirit with the beginning prayer and song, and my red, white, and blue blood is just pumping right now, so this is great. I got involved in politics back in the Tea Party days, so it feels like I'm home. Even though I'm from Maine, I want to thank you for this opportunity for allowing both of us to present our arguments. Now, I want to warn you, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you tonight, but that's on purpose. But quickly, before I go into my presentation, just a quick poll. Who's in favor of using the Constitution to propose term limits on Congress? Raise your hand. Who is against using the Constitution to propose term limits amendments, or any amendment? Okay, who's kind of on the fence and wants to learn more? Okay, all right. Well, good. Well, if you want to go deeper on this subject, Saturday at 10 at the hotel, Best Western Plus in Shillington, I'm going to do 4 hours of this. So, 4 hours, and I highly recommend you come if you are on the fence or if you're against, if you have an open mind to the truth. So, with that said, I want to jump into this. This was going to be what we cover. Free pizza Saturday, so you definitely want to come for the free pizza. I am going to be myth busting. I'm going to be destroying all the myths against an Article 5 convention at this, so it's going to be really good. Okay, John Dickinson at the Federal Convention said, "Experience must be our only guide. Reason may mislead us." Today I've changed that to "Experience must be our only guide. Fear is paralyzing us." I testify around the country for an Article 5 convention, and I constantly hear legislators fearful of using the Constitution as the framers intended. And it's really a shame. Our country is going to hell. Nothing is going to change unless we, through our state legislatures, use the Constitution to fix the problem. And I am going to prove to you tonight that, number one, the Federal Convention of 1787 was not a runaway convention. We do not, I repeat, we do not have an illegal constitution. Let's not dishonor the framers by saying they violated their commissions and exceeded their authority. And I'm going to prove that to you. My second proof I am going to show you tonight is that the Article 5 Convention is a limited convention and is not, I repeat, not a constitutional convention. So buckle up, get ready, this is what it's going to feel like. Here we go. Okay, we have a very long, rich history of conventions in our country. Rob Nadelson has done a great job collating many of these. This is how the colonies before our independence dealt with issues, and this is how the states after our independence and even after the adoption of the Constitution deals and has dealt with issues. These have all been limited conventions based on the subject matter: Indian negotiations, defense, price controls. Obviously, we're going to be focusing on a couple tonight, but before I do, I want you to look at number 39. We had an official convention of the states called by the Arizona State Legislature to, guess what, to draft rules for an Article 5 convention. So if anybody tells you we don't have the rules for this, it's nonsense. We didn't need that convention because we had the rules prior to that, but now it's official. Now, also, you might hear that we don't have precedent for such a convention, that the only precedent we have is the Philadelphia Convention where they adopted a new constitution. That is not true either, folks. In 1861, the country was heading to war. The states Virginia called an official convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution. They met for 3 weeks in February of 1861. They drafted several amendments. Their plan was to prevent the war from breaking out. Because it wasn't called under Article 5 requiring 2/3, they couldn't get it proposed out, so they gave that amendment to Congress. Former President John Tyler was the president of this convention. He walked over to Congress, gave it to them. They sat on it, and within a couple months the war broke out, so it was a moot point. But we know the process works, okay? Don't let anyone tell you we've never done this before. In fact, the states meet officially every single year. It's called the National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws. They meet for 1 week, and this convention operates just like an Article 5 convention. The states appoint commissioners. It's a limited convention based on a predetermined subject matter. When they arrive, they produce their credentials, showing their powers. They vote one state, one vote, just like an Article 5 convention, and whatever they pass by a majority vote, they then bring it back to their legislatures to have their state legislature adopt as state law if they like it. This has, any of you heard of the Uniform Commercial Code? That has come from a convention of the states. In fact, Pennsylvania is looking at 5 of these acts right now. So do not listen to people that tell you we don't know how to do this. This started in 1892 because Congress was interfering with the states, and the states said, hey, feds, get out of our business. This is a state issue. We'll let the states decide how they want to create laws. And this body creates laws for financial laws, family laws, all kinds of stuff. And the process is vibrant today, all right? Now, when it comes to state constitutions, we have a long, rich history of proposing amendments for state constitutions. Every state has had a convention to adopt their own state constitution. They've had over 6,000 amendments proposed in these conventions. In fact, my neighbor, New Hampshire, I'm from Maine. New Hampshire leads the country, 17 conventions, 2 to adopt a new constitution, 15 to propose amendments. I believe they proposed 243 and they ratified like 150 or something. We know how to do this. In fact, I recommend reading some books that I've read here. It states that, moreover, a number of conventions that were held in the latter part of the 20th century were limited in the topics that they were permitted to address. Tennessee has held 5 of these limited conventions. North Carolina, the legislature sought to control constitutional change by strictly limiting the sorts of amendments that could be proposed by the Constitutional Convention. Again, this is a limited process. In fact, Pennsylvania, you have done it yourself. Your last convention, 1967, was a limited convention, 4 subjects. They ended up drafting 7 proposals on those 4 subjects. And the convention faithfully observed the limitations placed upon it. Okay? This is limited. This is what Article 5 is. It's limited based upon what the states apply for, and I'm going to prove that to you right now. And those 7 proposals were actually adopted by your state, apparently. So, when people say we don't know how the process works, we don't have the rules, it is nonsense. Let's use our God-given brains and some common sense. Now, before I get into the most important conventions here, the Annapolis Convention of 1786 and the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, I want to address some terms. Today we use the term constitutional convention and limited convention. That's not the way they spoke back then. Back then they described the powers of a convention based on whether it has full power, and the word they used was plenipotentiary. That meant full powers. If it was limited or inferior, it was called subservient or subordinate. And this definition comes directly from Samuel Johnson's dictionary of 1755. This is their terminology. So plenipotentiary is full power, okay? Subservient is limited. Virginia called the Annapolis Convention. Here is the power given to it. It was limited because it was a subservient and it only dealt with commerce issues. To examine the relative situations and trade of the said states, to consider how far a system of government, the uniform system in their commercial regulations may be necessary to their common interest and their permanent harmony. It was limited to commerce. Madison, writing to James Monroe, said this: the assembly here would refer nothing to Congress. They would have revolted equally against a plenipotentiary commission to their deputies for the convention. So they were only for a limited convention at this time. Madison to Jefferson wrote in August, the states which have appointed deputies to Annapolis are, and then he lists them, many gentlemen, both within and without Congress, wish to make this meeting subservient to a plenipotentiary convention for amending the Confederation. Though my wishes are in favor of such an event, Yet I despair so much of its accomplishment at the present crisis that I do not extend my views beyond a commercial reform. Madison only wanted a commercial convention at this point. The Annapolis Convention met September 11th, 1786. Only 5 states sent delegates. They realized we did not have enough representation to conduct business, and they also, amongst themselves, realized we need to go back to our state legislatures and ask for expanded powers to call a plenipotentiary convention. And that's exactly what they did. They issued their report asking for this power for a convention in Philadelphia the next year to devise such further provisions as shall appear to them necessary to render the Constitution of the federal government adequate to the exigencies of the Union. No restrictions. Whatever, that's full power. Now, before I go further, I want us to understand the word revise, because this is going to come up. What do they mean by revise? The term revise means to review, to overlook, to consider over again, to re-examine. The example, we make a general review of the whole work. So a revision can revise the entire document. Okay? No restrictions whatsoever. Now, Virginia called the convention. It was not the Confederation Congress that called the Philadelphia Convention, it was Virginia. And these are the powers. This is the scope of the convention call. Convention proposed to be held in the city of Philadelphia in May next for the purpose of revising the federal convention. Revising means full review. Revision of the federal system to all its defects. Further concessions and provisions as may be necessary. Devising and discussing all such alterations and further provisions as may be necessary to render the federal constitution adequate to the exigencies of the Union. Not a single restriction. Full powers for our Philadelphia Convention. Madison wrote this to Jefferson in December, just a few months later. The recommendation from the meeting in Annapolis of a plenipotentiary convention in Philadelphia in May next has been well received by the assembly here. John Mercer, writing to Madison, said this: "The wiser part approved strongly of the convention in May. My last hopes have taken refuge there. They will, I believe, give almost unlimited powers." He was from Maryland. That's what they did. Here in a nutshell, the snapshot is what happened. September 11th, Annapolis issued, they convened and issued their report calling for a full convention, full power convention. Virginia calls that convention by sending out an invite to all the states with those powers referenced in their call. And then 4 months later, in February, 4 months, Congress kind of felt left out, as Congress always seems to be feeling. And what Congress did, now this is critical, under the Articles of Confederation, there is no provision allowing a convention to be called by Congress. Congress could not call such a convention. All Congress could do, and this is what they did, is endorse the convention that was already called, and they recommended it to take place. And in their opinion, it was not binding whatsoever. Well, before I get there, if you notice, the Annapolis recommendation was to have the state legislatures confirm or ratify whatever came out of the convention. Virginia changed that and made it that the states, not the legislatures, would confirm, allowing for the people to adopt it through conventions. Because a constitution must be adopted by the people. That was one of the problems with the Articles. It was an act of the legislatures. That is not how constitutions are to be given their authority. It must come from the people. And if you notice, in the opinion of Congress, here's what they wrote. For the sole and express purpose of revising, again, revising means full power, the Articles of Confederation in reporting to Congress and the several state legislatures such alterations and provisions therein as when agreed to in Congress and confirmed by the states, not the legislatures, render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies of government and the preservation of the Union. This opinion endorsed the convention with full powers and gave revised, again, full powers in allowing the people to ratify. So, Madison writes this to Jefferson afterwards. I think myself that it would be expedient in the first place to lay the foundation of the new system in such a ratification by the people themselves. They're already talking about a new system of government. Okay, that was the plan. They had full authority. In fact, I had handed out a sheet with all this information there. I ask you to please read Federalist 40. Madison refutes the false claim that the convention exceeded its powers. He titled it, "The Powers of the Convention to Form a Mixed Government Examined and Sustained." The convention was called to preserve the Union, not the Articles of Confederation. It was 100% legit, okay? Now that we proved that did not run away, let's take a look at the Article 5 Convention. We're going to go back to the convention in Philadelphia and see why it was placed in the Constitution. Now, Jefferson was not at the convention. He was in France at the time, but I love this quote. On every question of construction, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit of the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. Does that make sense? Do words have meaning? How many of you believe in the original meaning of the Constitution? That's it? Oh, that's all I believe in the original meaning of the Constitution? Hey, Sam. Who's Sam? All right. Well, you're going to have to come to my thing Saturday then. So, I'm an originalist. I believe in the original meaning of what they wrote. I believe in the original meaning of how the ratifiers, what they believed when they ratified it. So, here's my question to you, to all of us. Did the framers of the U.S. Constitution intend for an Article 5 convention to be limited to the subject or amendment agreed to by 2/3 of the states, or an open convention, or a constitutional convention? All right. How many believe it was a constitutional convention? Full power. How many believe it was limited? All right. Here we go. Let's see what the intent of the framers was. The first working day of the convention, May 29th, Governor Edmund Randolph stood up and introduced the Virginia Plan. In that plan contained the first amending provision of the convention, resolved that that provision ought to be made for the amendment of the Articles of the Union whensoever it shall seem necessary, and that the assent of the national legislature ought not to be required thereto. Makes a lot of sense. They did not want to have to go to the Congress to amend the Constitution. Why do you think that is? Maybe it might get out of control. Maybe it might not respond to the people. These guys were geniuses. That's what makes our Constitution so great, is the checks and balances. That's the problem. The checks and balances are not being used today. This is the ultimate check against a runaway federal government, and I'm going to prove that to you. Now, this next guy is my hero, Charles Pinckney from South Carolina. This is the true father of our Constitution. Because immediately after Edmund Randolph sat down, Mr. Pinckney stood up, and guess what he read? He read a complete Constitution that he wrote and brought to him to the convention. I bet none of you knew that. In that convention, in that Constitution is his amending provision, which reads, now pay attention, if 2/3 of the legislatures of the states apply for the same, they have to apply for the same amendment. The legislature of the United States shall call a convention for the purpose of amending the Constitution. Or should Congress, with the consent of 2/3 of each house, propose to the states amendments to the same, the agreement of 2/3 of the legislatures of the states shall be sufficient to make the said amendments parts of the Constitution. They must apply for the same amendment, Now, at this point, this convention had not only the power to propose, but also to amend and ratify. If Congress proposed, then the states would have to ratify. We get to June 11th, and George Mason stood up as they're discussing the amending provision again, and he said, "The plan now to be formed will certainly be defective, as the Confederation has been found on trial to be. Amendments, therefore, will be necessary, and it will be better to provide for them in an easy, regular, and constitutional way than to trust to chance and violence. It would be improper to require the consent of the national legislature because they may abuse their power." Do you see the wisdom of the framers? We get to August 6th now. This is the first draft of the U.S. Constitution reported out by the Committee of Detail. Contained in that is now the amending provision as read. On the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states in the Union for an amendment of this Constitution, the legislature of the United States shall call a convention for that purpose. Do you see, from day one, they knew they had to apply for a particular amendment. We get to September 10th now, near the end of the convention. Roger Sherman thought, hey, you know what? Congress should be allowed to propose amendments as well. And Hamilton agreed with him. So he made that motion, and then James Wilson moved that 3/4 of the states would need to ratify any amendments. They didn't vote on those motions because James Madison stood up, and he offered this wording. I will not read it all, but I want to read the first part. The legislature of the United States, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem necessary, or on the application of 2/3 of the legislature of the several states shall propose amendments to this Constitution. That was adopted, that language right there. We get to the very last day now of the convention, and they are reviewing every single article before they vote on it, and before they sign off on it. They get to Article 5. And I'm so glad George Mason, now he did not sign the Constitution, he became an anti-federalist. But I'm glad he stuck it out and didn't go home like the two boys from New York did. He stuck around, and he was like a thorn in their side, and thank God for that. Because he stood up, he knew something was going on. The plan of amending the Constitution is exceptional and dangerous, as the proposing of amendments is in both the modes to depend, in the first immediately, and in the second ultimately on Congress. No amendments of the proper kind would ever be obtained by the people if the government should become oppressive, which I believe will be the case. He did not want Congress to even propose the amendment applied for. They don't trust Congress. They were bright guys. And that's where the convention was added back into the amending provision. Gouverneur Morris and Elbridge Gerry made the motion, require convention on application of 2/3 of the states, and immediately after that passed unanimously without dissent. James Madison, he voted for it as well. He said, I got no problem with the convention, but I do not see why Congress would not be as much bound to propose amendments applied for by 2/3 of the states as to call a convention on the like application. That makes no sense if they were not applying for specific amendments. How could Congress propose something if it wasn't stated in the application? Do you see? Doesn't that make sense? Immediately after they approved that language, a motion was made by Roger Sherman to give Article 5 the power of a constitutional convention. Mr. Sherman moved to strike out of Article 5 after legislatures the words of 3/4, and so after the word conventions, leaving, this is the words of Madison, leaving future conventions to act in this manner like the present convention according to circumstances. That unanimous consent is basically what gives, it's a new compact. And they voted that down. No, this is not we're not giving this the power of what we're doing here today. Because unanimous consent, you only need that or use that when you're creating a new compact, not when you're altering a current compact. And 2 years later, Sherman said this, he's now in Congress. For by the present Constitution, we nor all the legislatures in the Union together do not possess the power of repealing it. All that is granted us by the 5th article is that whenever we shall think it necessary, we may propose amendments to this Constitution. Not that we may propose to repeal the old and substitute a new one. It's clear, folks. They understood they could not introduce a new Constitution in an Article 5 convention. You've already read this. I just want to show how simple this is. 2/3 is required for both. Obviously, if 2/3 of Congress, they have to vote on the same amendment to have it proposed. So obviously, 2/3 of the states have to apply for the same amendment to have it proposed. What trips people up here is where it says, shall propose amendments in the plural. You notice how both Congress and the states, that language is there? For some reason, people think, oh, that mandates more than one amendment has to be proposed. It's looking down in the future, the quarters of time. A convention for proposing amendments. The only time more than one amendment has ever been proposed by Congress was the Bill of Rights. Every other amendment was a single amendment. If this is equal with the states, and it is, that means the states can introduce and propose a single amendment. And let me prove that to you. Oh, before I do, Article 5 does not have any rules for ratifying conventions. Did you know that? There's no rule. There's no rules. Were they concerned about that? Of course not. They knew how to do, they did it all the time. In fact, 13 states ratified the Constitution with conventions. Our 21st Amendment to repeal Prohibition, 38 states called in 1933 conventions to ratify the amendment without any rules written in Article 5. Man, imagine that. It's experience, people. What is our experience under our history? Okay? All right, Federalist Papers. I love the Federalist Papers. James Madison said this about the amendment process, that useful alterations will be suggested by experience, could not but be foreseen. It moreover equally enables the general and the state governments to originate the amendment of errors, as they may be pointed out by the experience on one side or the other. Like perhaps the amendment of errors, which would get rid of career politicians, maybe term limits on Congress. There's a good amendment of errors right there. All right, let me explain to you now the difference, because Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 85 explains the difference between an Article 5 convention and a constitutional convention. The moment an alteration is made in the present plan, it becomes to the purpose of adoption a new one, and it must undergo a decision of each state. To its complete establishment throughout the Union, it will therefore require the concurrence of 13 states, unanimous consent. If, on the contrary, the Constitution proposed should once be ratified by all the states as it stands, alterations in it may at any time be effected by 9 states. That's your 2/3. Here then, the chances are as 13 to 9 in favor of subsequent amendment, rather than of the original adoption of an entire system. Every constitution for the United States must inevitably consist of a great variety of particulars in which 13 independent states are to be accommodated in their interests or opinions of interest in such a manner as to satisfy all the parties to the compact. It's a new compact. But every amendment to the Constitution, if once established, would be a single proposition and might be brought forward singly, and consequently, whenever 9, that's your 2/3, or rather 10, that's your 3/4, call convention, ratify. Or rather 10 states were what? Were united in the desire of a particular amendment. That amendment must infallibly take place. There can therefore be no comparison between the facility of effecting an amendment and that of establishing in the first instance a complete constitution. Enough said. It's a limited convention. One of the main purposes of the Article 5 convention is to stop the abuse of power in a runaway federal government. Okay, that's one of them. We have amendments that have overturned Supreme Court decisions. Are there any court decisions you'd like to see overturned? We had one recently, didn't we? Hamilton had closed out the entire Federalist argument with number 85, referring to the Article 5 Convention. I'm not going to read all this. He said, we may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachments of the national authority. That is what the convention is all about. If you think we have a runaway federal government, if you believe in the Constitution, if you want to do something about it, this is how we go about doing it. Okay, my time's running out. Oh, just to prove that, the preamble to the Bill of Rights. Here's what the preamble says. The conventions of a number of the states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers that further declaratory restrictive clauses should be added. 7 states, when they ratified the Constitution, submitted amendments that they want. Heck, New York submitted 33. New York wanted to do the whole thing over again, and they had an effort trying to make that happen. Here, let's go back. Wouldn't it be great if you can go back in time to see what these guys thought about on the very first Article 5 application? How did they interpret it? Well, let's do that. Virginia submitted the first application for the Bill of Rights. They didn't wait till after, and this was 1788 when they passed it. They weren't hoping that we just got to elect good people to go to Congress who will obey the Constitution. They were smarter than that. Here, what's important about this, over 50 members of the first Congress were either framers at the convention in Philadelphia or they were delegates at their state ratifying conventions. Every single one of them explicitly stated we can't do anything until 2/3 of the states submit similar applications for the same amendment or subject. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Now, what's interesting, Bland said by the 5th article of the Constitution, Congress are obliged to order this convention when 2/3 apply for it. But how can these reasons be properly weighed? And they said, well, what if 2/3 don't apply for it? Maybe Congress should take it up. And that's what they did. Congress took up the Bill of Rights. Only 2 states applied for it, but it put the pressure on them to propose it. And they did 5-6 months after this. Did James Madison tremble at Article 5 Convention? Have you ever heard of this? Okay? That's a quote taken out of context. He wrote a letter, and on my paper, I want you to read the context of this letter. He is responding to George Tuberville, who's asked Madison, hey, what do you think about what New York's trying to do? Rewrite the whole thing with a revision convention. And he writes this. This letter destroys their argument that Article 5 is a constitutional convention. Because what he says, he lists the 2 different types of conventions in the very letter. He says, a convention cannot be called without the unanimous consent of the parties who are to be bound by it if first principles are to be recurred to. That's a new compact, a vote by the people, first principles. That's what he's referring to. Or without the previous application of 2/3 of the state legislatures if the forms of the Constitution are to be pursued. That's Article 5. The difficulties in either of these cases must evidently be much greater than will attend the origination of amendments in Congress. Listen, he thought it should have been amended. Right during that period of time, the heat between the 2 parties, he said this in the letter, we won't get enough states to call unanimously to redo the whole thing. We couldn't even get 2/3 to agree on amendments. He said the simplest way is to have Congress propose amendments. Read the letter, please. And under Section 3 of that letter is where that quote comes that he trembled. He was referring to, he didn't want to go through the whole thing over again because nothing good would come out of it. In fact, if you read Federalist 38, he goes into great detail about this, and he says that they were looking to redo the whole thing, and that is what he's against, not Article 5. Okay, oh boy, I gotta blow through this real quick, guys, because you gotta come Saturday. Oh, nullification. I do want to address nullification real quick. Madison said this about nullification. On the other hand, what more dangerous than nullification or more evident than the progress it continues to make, either in its original shape or in the disguises it assumes? Nullification has the effect of putting powder under the Constitution and Union and a match in the hand of every party to blow them up at pleasure. Nullification is basically putting ourselves back under the Articles of Confederation where the states don't abide by anything. We want a more perfect union. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward, making it better, not worse. At least I do. And I want to use the Constitution. Nullification is not a constitutional remedy. Let's first exhaust our constitutional remedies before we go to any other extremes. Does that make sense? Oh, okay. I'm going to end that, I guess. Last thing, Congress has introduced 12,000 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. 12,000, 55 this year. And many of these are great amendments. The states have never introduced a single amendment under Article 5. And so it's time we wake up and use the authority that they've given us. So I want to thank you for your time, and I hope to see you Saturday. Come see me at the table when we're done here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Folks, we have the next speaker is going to be coming up. I just want to let you know at any time you want to ask a question, you can't ask the question, put your hands up and Wayne will put a piece of paper out there for you to at least write that we can do the question, go after it. So up now, we're going to have Joanna Martin. Joanna is well known nationally for her powerful explanation of the genuine meaning of our Constitution and of the dangers of an Article 5 convention. Let's all welcome Joanna Martin.
Yeah, at the party, and most of them were yeah, that's an odd thought. Yeah, and I ate lunch at 1, and then I just don't get hungry. So that's all I needed. Oh, we had the one girl and cupcakes. I ate a cupcake on the way out at dessert.
Go ahead, okay, I'm a little short. I didn't wear my stilettos.
I had my glass of wine.
Okay. Shall I start? Okay. My exhibit list has the proof of what I'll say. My email address is going to be posted, so contact me to get my exhibit list. Our problems are caused by the moral decline of the American people, their lust for federal funds, and ignorance of civics. Everyone ignores the Constitution. No amendment can fix these problems. A term limits amendment would speed up the replacement of people in Congress who ignore our Constitution with new people who ignore our Constitution. And all the conventions Mr. Quinn talked about had nothing to do with addressing our federal Constitution. So they're irrelevant. Tonight I will show you. The globalists want a new constitution which moves the United States into the North American Union. This This task force report, can we cut the clatter, the chatter, thank you. This task force report, prepared by the Council on Foreign Relations, provides for the political integration of Canada, the United States, and Mexico. What this sets up is so antithetical to our Constitution that they must get a new Constitution before we can be moved into the North American Union. To get a new Constitution, they need Congress to call an Article 5 convention. So it isn't about getting amendments to our existing Constitution. That's just the pretext for state legislatures to apply for a convention. Article 5 provides two methods of amending our Constitution. Congress proposes amendments or calls a convention to propose amendments if 2/3 of the states apply for a convention. The first method was used for the existing 27 amendments. Congress proposed them and sent them to the states for ratification. We've never had a convention under the second method. It is dangerous, and James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, 4 U.S. Supreme Court justices, and other legal scholars warn against it because a convention gives the enemies of our Constitution the opportunity to get rid of it and impose a new one. But our enemies have been pushing for a convention for some 60 years, ever since the Ford Foundation produced the Constitution for the new states of America. We are disarmed under this Constitution. In the past, conservatives defeated the periodic pushes for a convention. So Mark Meckler's organization, the so-called Convention of States Project, repackaged a convention to appeal to conservatives. They now claim that the only way to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government is to amend our Constitution. And we can only get amendments to do that at a convention. So let's look at the Constitution. They say must be amended to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. With this Constitution, we created a federation of states, united under a national government for the limited purposes enumerated in the Constitution. We created a federation of states united under a national government for the limited purposes enumerated in the Constitution. We listed every power we granted to the national government. All our Constitution authorizes the national government to do over the country at large falls into 4 categories. 1, military defense, international commerce, and relations. 2, immigration and naturalization. 3, establish a commercial system, uniform weights and measures, patents and copyrights, a money system based on gold and silver, bankruptcy laws, mail delivery, and some road building, and 4, with some of the amendments, secure certain civil rights. That's it. All other powers are reserved by the states or the people. It's only with respect to the enumerated powers that the national government has lawful authority over the country at large. This chart lists the powers. Everybody ignores this limited delegation. This knowledge has been lost, and so the federal government turned into Frankenstein. Everyone ignores the Constitution because we didn't know the enumerated powers and didn't care enough to learn the federal government was able to usurp thousands of powers not on the list. They paid us to go along with it. State and local governments, educational institutions, hospitals, businesses, farmers, and individual citizens collaborated with the usurpations by taking federal funds to participate in unconstitutional federal programs. To claim that these problems can be fixed by amending our Constitution makes as much sense as saying that since people violate the 10 Commandments, God should amend the 10 Commandments. The Constitution isn't our problem. We are the problem. Like Esau, we sold our heritage to the federal government. Mark Levin pushes for a convention and claims we will get amendments to limit the federal government. But his so-called liberty amendments do the opposite of what he claims. His amendment to limit the federal bureaucracy legalizes what are now unconstitutional federal agencies: education, energy, health and human services, housing and urban development, agriculture, environmental protection, etc., etc., etc. Our Constitution doesn't authorize these agencies, but Levin's amendment legalizes all such agencies for as long as Congress reauthorizes them. Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution says only Congress may make laws. But since Woodrow Wilson, federal agencies have been writing rules, the Code of Federal Regulations. All these rules are unconstitutional as outside the scope of powers delegated and in violation of Article 1, Section 1. But Levin's amendment to limit the federal bureaucracy legalizes these rules and the rulemaking process for as long as Congress approves them. Levin's amendment to limit federal spending is a knife in the gut of our Constitution. Our Constitution limits federal spending to the enumerated powers. If you go through the Constitution and highlight all the powers granted to Congress and the President, you will have a complete list of the objects on which Congress is authorized to spend money. That's how our Constitution controls spending, but everyone ignores it. Levin's amendment substitutes a budget for the enumerated powers and thus legalizes the current practice where Congress spends money on whatever is put in the budget. His amendment thus changes the constitutional standard for spending from whether the object is an enumerated power and creates a completely new constitutional authority to spend on whatever Congress or the President want to spend on. It thus transforms our Constitution from one of enumerated powers only to one of unlimited powers. And while his amendment pretends to impose a limit on the amount of spending, that limit is fictitious because it can be waived whenever Congress votes to waive it. During September 2016, COS staged a 3-day mock convention at Williamsburg, Virginia, supposedly to show that at a convention called by Congress under Article 5, the delegates would do nothing more than come up with wise amendments to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. COS invited Republican state legislators, and they proposed 6 amendments which vastly increased the powers of the federal government. One amendment would grant to the federal government new powers such as I personally witnessed during the 1970s in communist Central and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. It grants to the federal government power over the movement and transportation of persons across state lines. This would provide constitutional authority for the federal government to require prior approval to cross state lines, require internal passports as in the Soviet Union, establish checkpoints at state borders, and ban use of privately owned vehicles to cross state lines. Their other amendments are just as bad. Last month, COS held another mock convention and came up with 6 more destructive amendments. One, the countermand amendment, would deprive the states of their natural right to nullify unconstitutional acts of Congress and the President unless a majority of the states agree, and would immunize the Supreme Court from any challenges whatsoever from the states or the people. None of their proposed amendments limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. They do the opposite. They grant new powers, legalize powers the feds have already usurped, and strip the states of and the people of their retained powers. There is no amendment which can make those who ignore the existing limits in the Constitution obey the Constitution. When the feds usurp powers not granted, and when states and local governments and businesses and farmers and hospitals and churches and educational institutions and individual citizens accept federal funds to participate in unconstitutional federal programs, all of them are ignoring the existing constitutional limits on federal powers. So their claim that we can get amendments to rein in the power and jurisdiction of the federal government is false. The convention pushers claim that the convention method of getting amendments was added to Article 5 so that when the federal government violates the limits in the Constitution, we could rein them in by amending the Constitution. That's absurd. Our framers were not silly men. They agreed that the purpose of amendments is to correct defects in the Constitution. George Mason's concern was that Congress might refuse consent to amendments needed to correct defects in the Constitution. So he wanted a convention added to Article 5 so that the people could propose amendments to correct defects in the Constitution if Congress refused to correct them. For example, our original Constitution had an oppressive defect. It institutionalized slavery. What if the states wanted an amendment to ban slavery, but Congress didn't agree? Adding the convention method to Article 5 permitted the people to make amendments to correct defects Congress refused to correct. So the convention method was added to Article 5, and it provided a second way to get amendments to fix defects in the Constitution. But it also provided a way to get a sneaky way to get a new Constitution under the pretext of getting amendments. This is why James Madison warned that those who secretly wish to get rid of our Constitution would push for a convention under the pretext of getting amendments. And this is why, during April 1788, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison began warning against another convention. Convention pushers claim that Congress has nothing to do with the convention except name the time and place of the initial meeting. They tell state legislators that they will select and control the delegates and that they will select the amendments to be considered. Their assurances are false. Our Constitution shows Article 5 grants to Congress the power to call a convention, and Article 1, Section 8, last clause, grants to Congress the power to make all laws necessary and proper to carry out the powers granted to the federal government. The April 2014 report of the Congressional Research Service shows that Congress recognizes that it has exclusive authority to organize the convention, including judging and recording state applications and determining the number and selection process for delegates. So Congress has the authority to determine how delegates will be selected. In Congress's preliminary preparations for a convention in the past, Congress indicated it would provide for the popular election of delegates. If Congress calls a convention today, we don't know what Congress will decide. They might again provide for the election of delegates, or Congress could select the delegates. The sponsors of House Bill 458, filed in Pennsylvania, pertaining to delegate selection and control, those sponsors are living in fantasy land. Who judges and counts the applications? The convention pushers falsely assure state legislators that Congress can't call a convention until Congress gets 34 applications asking for the same amendment, and that delegates can't do anything except consider amendments previously requested by 34 state legislatures. Meanwhile, their people in Congress are filing legislation for Congress to count all applications together, regardless of the amendment specified in the application. The legislation filed last year in Congress, House Bill 8419, provides that all non-rescinded applications would be counted together to get to 34 states. The legislation filed this year, H-Con Resolution 24, provides that all applications on any national issue or for a balanced budget amendment, whether since rescinded or not, are to be counted together. So it doesn't matter what amendment a state legislature asks for. There's no such thing as a limited convention because all applications will be counted together. So, Congress decides how delegates will be selected, and Congress decides how to count the applications. Once 2/3 of the state legislatures, that's 34 states, have applied for a convention, Congress takes over, and state legislatures have nothing more to do with the convention. They claim that a convention is safe because 3/4 of the states have to ratify whatever comes out. That's false. Our Declaration of Independence recognizes the right of the people to alter or abolish their government instead of a new one. We invoked that right in 1776 to throw off the British monarchy. In 1787, we threw off our first constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and set up a new constitution, the one we now have, which created a new government. How did we get from our first constitution to our second constitution? There was a convention to propose amendments to our first constitution. The Continental Congress resolved on February the 21st, 1787, to call a convention, quote, for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation, end quote. But the delegates ignored this limitation, and they ignored similar instructions from their states, and they wrote our second constitution. And in Federalist Paper number 40, at the 15th paragraph, James Madison, the father of our Constitution, invoked that transcendent and precious right of a people to throw off one government instead of a new one as justification for ignoring their instructions and writing a new Constitution. You can't stop that from happening at another convention. If we have a convention now, George Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton won't be there. Who will be there? We don't know. Congress decides how delegates will be selected. And you can be sure that among the delegates will be those who steer the others to the predetermined outcome, which is a proposed third constitution. A third constitution will have its own mode of ratification. Our first constitution required the Continental Congress and all of the 13 states to ratify amendments. But our second constitution, drafted at the Amendments Convention of 1787, provided at Article 7 that it would require only 9 states for ratification. If we have another convention, nothing can stop delegates from proposing a third constitution with its own mode of ratification. New constitutions are already prepared. The proposed constitution for the new states of America is ratified by a national referendum. Whoever controls the voting machines will determine the outcome. The states are dissolved and replaced by regional governments answerable to the new national government. The Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America is proposed by the Revolutionary Communist Party, USA. The Constitution 2020 movement is backed by George Soros. He wants a Marxist constitution. The Obama faction supports this one. The National Constitution Center is a quasi-official agency of the federal government. They sponsored a constitution drafting project which proposed 3 new constitutions. The Progressive Constitution, the Libertarian Constitution, and here is the so-called Conservative Constitution. Open borders are in the Libertarian Constitution. Abortion, sexual orientation, and sexual preference are expressly granted constitutional rights in the Progressive Constitution. Mark Meckler smears and ridicules those who warn that if Congress calls a convention, our existing Constitution is likely to be replaced by a new one which imposes a tyranny. He sneers at those who warn that we could lose our right to keep and bear arms. But the so-called conservative Constitution was co-authored by Princeton law professor Robert P. George, who is a member of Mark Meckler's COS board. It imposes gun controls with red flag confiscations. Now let's look at the New World Order. President George Bush Sr. assured us it will usher in a new era of peace and prosperity. During 2005, his son, then the president, met with the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of Mexico, and they hammered out a plan for a North American Union. A task force report for the Council on Foreign Relations wrote up the plan. And here it is. A parliament is to be set up over and above Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and our military and police forces are to be combined. This is altogether repugnant to our existing Constitution. In order to institute the North American Union, they must get rid of this. To get rid of this, they need a new Constitution for the United States. To get a new Constitution, they need an Article 5 convention. This is what the elite want. They are funding the push for a convention. Meckler claims his is a grassroots organization. He's funded by grandmas sending him $5 checks out of their paltry monthly incomes with little notes attached saying they wish they could give more. But the tax form 990s filed by Meckler's organization, which he signs as president, show he's funded primarily by mega donors who each give his organizations up to $2 million a year. Moreover, two members of the Council on Foreign Relations, Robert P. George and C. Boyden Gray, have been on Mark Meckler's COS board since its inception in 2014. Meckler isn't truthful when he claims that COS is a grassroots organization. I believe he's serving the interests of the globalists who would move us into the North American Union. And the CFR has two of their people on Meckler's COS board. The Biden administration is also pushing the North American Union. On January the 10th, 2023, Biden and the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of Mexico issued the Declaration of North America. This is a summary of the Council on Foreign Relations Task Force report. That's the agenda behind the push for an Article 5 convention. To move us into the North American Union, they need a new constitution. COS says there is no danger of getting a new constitution because delegates can be controlled by faithful delegate laws. That's absurd. Congress decides how delegates will be selected. State legislatures have no power to select the delegates. Our Declaration of Independence recognizes the right of a people to form, modify, or abolish their government. So the delegates can, like James Madison, exercise that self-evident right to throw off the governments we have and write a new constitution, which moves us into a new form of government. And since it will have its own mode of ratification, it's sure to be approved. This is why James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, 4 U.S. Supreme Court justices, and many other legal scholars warn against an Article 5 convention. Federal spending. The Pew report shows that for fiscal year 2020, 1/3 of the revenue the Pennsylvania state government got was from federal funds. And that's a pittance compared to the additional federal money sent into Pennsylvania to local governments, non-governmental organizations, price supports, grants, Medicare, Social Security, etc. We can't properly rant and rave about how we need a balanced budget amendment when we have our hands out for all that money. And all that money and the money sent to the other 49 states year in and year out is added to the national debt. And all that spending is unconstitutional. I say let's downsize the federal government to its enumerated powers. So what's the solution? First, James Madison said our Constitution depends on the people having the virtue and intelligence to select men of virtue and wisdom to office. But we lost our virtue and intelligence. We abandoned personal responsibility. We accepted federal strings when we accepted federal money. We didn't learn the Constitution and obey it. We cannot restore our Constitution unless we face up to our moral and patriotic duties. Second, don't go along with the usurpations. Our Declaration of Independence says colonial legislatures opposed the king's invasions on the rights of the people. Today, states must oppose violations of our Constitution. Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison said, since the states created the federal government, they are the final authority on whether their creature has violated the constitutional compact the states made with each other. And when the federal government usurps powers not delegated, each state has the natural right to nullify of their own authority all such acts of the federal government. The refusal to submit to unconstitutional acts is the remedy our framers advised when the federal government violates the Constitution. And stop taking federal money. It was the states and local governments and everybody else who had their hands out for federal money who sold our reserve powers to the federal government. So let's sum this up. We know our Constitution already limits the federal government to the enumerated powers. We know our framers told the states to refuse to go along with unconstitutional acts of the federal government. We know everyone has ignored our Constitution for 100 years. We know that the proposed amendments increase the powers of the federal government. We know that amendments can't control governments which ignore the Constitution. We know that delegates can't be controlled. We know that a new Constitution can be imposed. And we know that new constitutions are already prepared. The globalists are spending millions to get a convention. Why? Our Constitution is preventing the political integration of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Globalists need a convention so they can complete their coup against us and get a new constitution which transforms the United States from a sovereign nation to a member state of the North American Union. Read the task force report of the Council on Foreign Relations and the January 10, 2023 Declaration of North America. That is what they want, but first they have to get rid of this. And remember, any new constitution has its own vote of ratification. If it's a national popular vote, we're done for. Thank you. Please contact me to get my exhibit list. I'm a retired litigation attorney. I prove what I say. My proof is on my exhibit list. Thanks.
Okay, folks, we're going to do a gun raffle now. This is for the Remington 1911 in .45 caliber ACP. This weapon has been safety checked. I'm a little disappointed. The person that I was going to have draw the ticket tonight couldn't make it. It was actually John Fetterman. He's at Walmart. Wait. He's at Walmart getting fitted for a new hoodie to wear on the Senate floor. You know, what a class act, huh? What a class act. Anyway, so we're gonna have to go second fiddle. Joshua Prince, is he still here? Josh, everybody's favorite Second Amendment attorney, Joshua Prince, come on up here, buddy, and help me draw these winning tickets here. And I hate to say you were second fiddle to Fetterman, but you know, man, you were hit by the bus twice. So, what we're gonna do? Absolutely, and he's a much sharp dresser. I mean Fetterman compared to. No, anyway. So this is for the 1911. The first ticket pulled is for the firearm. We're gonna pull a second ticket. That person's gonna win an American flag kit. And we're going to pull a third ticket, which is going to give you another ticket to be entered in for the AR-15 and the pistol drawing. We're going to give you a free ticket. So the first one out of the drum is going to be the winner for the 1911.
All right, we have Michelle Reed. Number 43.
Michelle here?
You don't want to miss out on a 1911.
She's still going to get the gun.
No, it becomes mine now. All right, for the American flag kit, we have number 28, Rothenberger.
He's not here. Not here? Not here?
Makes my job. All right, and for the free ticket for the AR pistol, we have number 134, Nate.
Number 134, Nate. Okay, thanks, Josh. We appreciate it. Everybody knows Josh. He's a great attorney, pro Second Amendment. Let's hear it for him. Even though he can't fill the shoes of Fetterman, but close. Or the clothing. And again, folks, before you leave, go over and see Joe and Vicki and Kim over at the gun table and get a ticket on your way out for the AR-15 and the pistol. That's 2 guns for 1 ticket for $10. And they're, it's an M4 AR-15 and a 9mm dagger pistol. Thanks. Check, 1, 2, 3. Test, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, folks, we're going to go into Q&A in about 1 minute. Make sure that your questions, we want to alternate them between the two speakers. Please only have it be for around 30 seconds, and the speakers, 90 seconds. Folks, okay, we want to get started. Please be quiet. And I think the first question goes to Joanna. Question for Joanna. Wayne, whoever, Tom, question for Joanna. There's someone in the back there.
No one has the mic yet.
Thank you, Rebecca. Len, Rebecca can do it if you want. Thank you. Okay, do we have our first question? It should be for Joanna.
Hey, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, and I can hear it.
Can I ask now, if 3/4 of the states adopt a new constitution, will those states that do not adopt it be able to secede, and will all federal laws now standing be nullified?
It's working now.
No. Any new constitution will have its own new mode of ratification. Remember, the Article 7 of our existing constitution provides that it would be ratified when approved by 9 states. But the proposed constitution for the new states of America provides in Article 12, Section 1, that it is ratified by a national referendum called by the President. So if a new constitution is proposed, we don't know what method of ratification will be set forth in the new constitution.
Thank you, Joanna. Next question we have, it should be for Ken.
Hi, Ken. My name is Josh Prince. I want to thank you for coming out.
Oh, they are.
Yep. I'm a civil rights attorney as well as a recent candidate on the Republican side for Commonwealth Court. The reason I bring that up is a part of my platform was removing the politicization of the judiciary. Here becomes my question. We see too frequently the politicization of the judiciary, and the fact remains that while I may disagree with you on whether you can have a limited Article 5 convention, let's say you're right. At the end of the day, even if you get what you want, what does it matter? As long as we still have a political judiciary that is going to interpret things consistent with their political views, it doesn't matter. And here in Pennsylvania, we saw that in 2015. We didn't get out to vote. We saw 3 very liberal candidates elected to our Supreme Court who in 2016 went and implemented their own districting map, even though the Pennsylvania Constitution is explicit that only the General Assembly can draft and implement a map. So explain to me how I'm wrong. If, as long as we still have the politicization in the judiciary, it doesn't matter what we do. We need to focus on changing our judiciary. We have a judicial crisis, not a constitutional crisis, at least in my opinion.
Thank you, Josh. Ken?
Well, I will address that base at the federal level, okay, because that's what the amendment process, the Article 5 is dealing with the federal. And I'll let you know how I'm trying to help. We have the resolution here in Pennsylvania. It's a resolution for 2 Article 5 applications, 2 separate calls. One for term limits on Congress, one for term limits on the U.S. Supreme Court. So, limiting power is what's critical. Do you have term limits on your court?
Yes. They have to retire at 75. That's it. And they run for retention every 10 years. But in the history of the Commonwealth, only one judge has ever not been retained in a retention vote.
So you do not have term limits on them?
Correct.
So there's a start. See, what we need to do and what the amendment provision does is we need to change the structure of how people, I'm just dealing with, look what we could accomplish with getting rid of the incumbents in Congress and in courts. Heck, I support term limits for dog catchers, okay? people should not hold power too long because they get corrupted. And so if we want change, we need to wash them away every election cycle in Washington. Think about this. If we had term limits 30 years ago, remember in 2010, I was just talking to a gentleman about this. We voted, 40, 50 Tea Party people we sent down in D.C. Remember that? Rah! We felt great. What changed? Nothing. Because once they get down there, we can never get enough of them to make a difference because they get corrupted and they become part of the problem. It's like the Borg on Star Trek. They become assimilated. And so we need to freshen that dirty water down there on a regular, consistent basis, and only term limits can do that. And I would suggest term limits for the courts as well.
Wrap it up. Okay. Another question. Next one will be for Joanna.
Well, thank you both. I thought both presentations were fantastic. And you actually agree in the basic thing that we have a runaway federal government, which is specifically the solution for that. Well, the Constitution, if used properly, would have prevented the runaway government. You both agree with that also. You have clauses in the Constitution, such as the General Welfare Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, then of course you have the invention of the Federal Reserve and the income tax, all of which have caused the problems that you're trying to solve.
Question, please.
So why not use the Supreme Court and bring these instances up to them to determine their constitutionality? And all the things I mentioned need to be defined or declared unconstitutional.
Joanna?
Is that a question? Oh.
Yeah.
Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison were very clear. The Supreme Court is not the final authority on the genuine meaning of our Constitution. The Supreme Court was created by Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court is nothing more than a creature of the Constitution. The states are the creators. The states created the federal government. The states created the Supreme Court when they ratified the Constitution. It is the states who are the final and ultimate authority on all acts of the federal government, and that includes the Supreme Court. James Madison specifically recognized in his notes on nullification that the federal courts are as likely to usurp as are the other two branches. Hence, the states have the absolute right to judge and nullify all unconstitutional acts of all three branches of the federal government.
Thank you, Joanna. Next question. What's that? That's your turn. You want to take that? Fine.
Is there another question? I would like to answer that one because that brings up a good point. James Madison, he said this, and you'll notice I provide the actual quotes to support my research. His issue back then, I believe it was like 1810 or so, he said we had two constitutions back then. The one written with enumerated powers, and the one being expanded by the interpretation. He specifically said the General Welfare Clause and the Common Defense Clauses were a fund of power, that money can be spent for anything now, the way it's being interpreted. And so what he said was, let's make it simple. Let's amend the U.S. Constitution and take those terms completely out of it. So, the question and the answer is yes. The states can have the final answer. It's through the Article 5 convention process to make these changes necessary. That's why they gave it to us, and that's what all of them have stated.
Now, I'll have to respond.
Thank you, Ken. The next question is going to go to Joanna. If you want to respond and take your question, that's fine. Then we need to move on to other questions.
I've got to, that is totally incorrect. Read Federalist Paper number 41, the last 4 paragraphs. James Madison specifically addresses the general welfare clause. He points out that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 is a general statement which is immediately followed by a list of particulars which define and limit the general expression. Federalist Paper number 41, the last 4 paragraphs.
Thank you, Joanna. Next question for Kenn.
Justice Antonin Scalia, who certainly knew constitutional things as well as any justice that I've seen recently, sad loss, he initially thought an Article 5 convention made sense. He later said it was inappropriate for the times in which we were living, and to that I would interpret as being that people are inadequately educated on what our Constitution is and what its limitations are on the federal government.
Question,
what our
please.
duties are.
Question, please.
Do you agree with Antonin Scalia, or why not?
I agree with Scalia because Scalia was not against an Article 5 convention. Scalia was against a constitutional convention. And you know what Scalia said? He wanted the states to use... You laugh. I've got the video on our website. I want you to listen to it. I've got his quotes. He said the states need to exercise this authority just to bring Congress in line, because if the states don't do it, Congress will never change. And so Scalia wanted, you know what he wanted for an amendment by the states? To revise Article 5 to make it easier for the states to propose amendments. That is the truth about Antonin Scalia. He was against a full power convention, not an Article 5, and we've got the videos to prove it.
Thank you, Kenn. Next question for Joanna.
Excuse me, Sam. I have got to respond to that. That is also false.
Okay, that'll be your turn.
In 1979, Justice Scalia supported an Article 5 convention. He was at that time a young law professor, wet behind the ears. In 2014, he's wised up and he opposed an Article 5 convention. He said, oh, I wouldn't want that. Who knows what would come out of that? Now, to say that James Madison supported an Article 5, that Justice Scalia supported an Article 5 convention when he became smart is totally false.
Read the sentence after he said that.
Hold it, Joanna.
She leaves out the remaining sentence.
Kenn, is this your turn? Question for Kenn? Okay, back there.
Again, assuming...
What's your name?
My name's Ron.
Hey, Ron.
Let's assume that Ms. Martin is wrong, that Congress does not send the delegates or decide the delegates.
She's completely wrong on that.
Let's assume for a second that the state legislature sends them. Why would I believe that career politicians at the state level who also aspire to go on to the federal level, who tell us all the time that elections are our term limits, and who would certainly not like to see a precedent at the federal level on term limits, because then the pressure would be on them at the state level, why would I believe even the state legislature would send people to the convention who would actually enact term limits?
Well, you make a good point, because it's ambition against ambition. Most of the state legislators want to get to Congress. There's a lot of them that want to go there, right? So, if they go to initiate our amendment, that is going to sweep out probably 2/3 of the members of Congress to make it much easier for them to get there. So we need to use, as Madison said, ambition rivals ambition. So that is why they would want to do that, because it would make it easier for them to get to Congress. Open seat elections are better for everybody. It gives more people an opportunity to participate in our government. It gives we the people more choices to vote. Listen, I'm from Maine. Do you know how sick and tired I get of only 2 options for U.S. Senate? Susan Collins, who promised to only serve 2 terms, is now there for her 5th term. Enough is enough. We have got to destroy the incumbent party that's controlling everything, and that's what term limits would do.
But the current reason that they want to go is because they're career politicians. So if you're going to limit that, that ambition goes away.
But they're not there for life.
Thank you, Kenn. Folks, I'm going to alter the format here. There's going to be 2 more questions. I'm going to give each of them an option. Joanna, you can either take the question from the audience for your last question, or say whatever you want. I'm going to give Ken the same option then. Okay, question for Joanna. Back in the back.
Joanna, Ken mentioned a lot of conventions that were held by the states. Could you comment on them?
I certainly can. States can hold conventions all the time. There can be conventions of county court clerks or state attorney generals. The governors of the states get together and have conventions. That's well and good. They have absolutely nothing to do with our Constitution. The only convention provided for in our Constitution for addressing our federal Constitution is the convention provided for at Article 5 U.S. Constitution. And that convention is called by Congress, and pursuant to Article 1, Section 8, last clause, the necessary and proper clause, Congress has the power to make all the laws necessary and proper to carry out its power to call the convention. So, call a convention for the purpose of addressing our federal Constitution. The conventions Mr. Quinn talks about are totally irrelevant.
Thank you, Joanna. Same format for Ken. Question from the audience. Ken, you have the option of taking a question or saying what you want.
So I get a closing statement only if I refuse the question?
Yes. There is no closing. There's no closing statements and questions.
I hate to shut you down. Can you see me after? I gotta say some stuff. I gotta get this off my chest. I want to resurrect the spirit of George Washington. This is what he said about the anti-federalists who are using all this fear tactics against the framers and the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. The opponents, listen to the father of our country. The opponents, I expected, for it has ever been that the adversaries to a measure are more active than its friends, would endeavor to give it an unfavorable complexion, with a view to bias the public mind. This evidently is the case with the writers in opposition, for their objections are better calculated to alarm the fears than to convince the judgment of their readers. They build them upon principles which do not exist in the Constitution, which the known and literal sense of it does not support them in, and this too after being flatly told they are treading on untenable ground, and after an appeal is made to the letter and spirit thereof for proof, and then as if the doctrine was uncontrovertible, draw all such consequences as are necessary to rouse the apprehensions of the ignorant and unthinking. Folks, we have got to stop listening to the fear-mongering. Congress does not appoint the delegates. Did Virginia appoint the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention? Of course not.
Ken, wrap it up, please.
The states gave this all authority to themselves, not Congress. The whole purpose, I proved to you tonight, was to bypass the Congress. Are we going to actually use the Constitution as the framers intended to address many of these issues or not? Shame on us if we don't, and we deserve what we get if we don't. Thank you.
Okay, Ken. Folks, first of all, I want to thank both speakers. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, I think they both did a great job bringing forth their position. There is so much more that they can tell you. Talk to us at the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. Please do not leave. We're going to do a closing prayer. Before that, I do want to make an announcement that we're doing 50-50. The Berks County Patriots are participating in the Ole Fair. We're looking for a couple volunteers. We need someone, Linda, from 2 to 4 on Saturday, and two people from 4 to 6. If you're interested in helping us, please do so. Okay, we're going to go into the 50-50.
While we're waiting, can I please invite you to come to the Best Western in Shillington Saturday from 10 to 2 for a deep dive. I'll be covering more of this. Come see me at the table.
Thank you so much for tuning into the live stream. If you learned something new about the Article 5 Convention, please consider following my channel. That is Gwenny7, GWYNNY7 on YouTube and Rumble, and Gwen's Notes on Facebook. That's GWYN''S Notes. Also, consider giving a donation to help me cover more events like this. You can donate via PayPal at Gwyneth Fowler, GWYNETH. F is in Frank, OWLER. Please send us family and friend. You can also donate via Venmo at Gwenny7, GWYNNY7, or via Cash App at $Gwenny7. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot. It helps me cover events like this, and I'll see you next time. Good night, and God bless America.